I may just be some guy on the internet, but we all have an opinion about what we consider to be great movies. Even the greatest movie. Movies that excel in their craft and artistry. Movies that exemplify the medium and everything it can be. Movies that move us, inspire us, challenge us, even horrify us. A movie that is not merely our favorite, but that we might even, for whatever it's worth, call the best and greatest movie ever made. And for whatever my opinion is worth, I think a very good argument could be made that Fantasia is not only Walt Disney's greatest film, or the greatest animated film, but the greatest film ever made by anybody. I might even, with enough drinks in me, be so bold as to argue that Fantasia is the single greatest artistic work of the 20th century in any medium. It is a bold claim, perhaps ridiculous on the face of it, certainly laughable to both the art house theater crowd and the Hollywood blockbuster fans whose favorite movie is the most recent one they've seen. Fantasia has certainly had its detractors over time. From those who feel it degrades classical music, to those who find it too hokey and cloying and Disney, to those who felt that Walt Disney was having ideas above his station. Almost invariably, critiques of Walt Disney in general, and Fantasia in particular, have the tone of a class critique. Cartoons are beneath the dignity of classical music and the cultured hoi polloi. But if we first accept that film was the art form of the 20th century, the defining artistic medium of the century across cinemas and television, then animation would be the art form of cinema. It is one thing to point a camera in the direction of a play and film it, even if you do so very dynamically. It is another to understand and manipulate the very fabric of the medium itself. The first animators had the presence of mind to realize that each frame was a tiny picture that could be altered to produce the illusion of life. Contrary to its reputation in North America of being merely fluff for kids, I think animation is the highest form of film. It is the purest form of film. Pure imagination translated directly to celluloid, unencumbered by concerns about what is possible and realistic to perform. The film that could best exemplify animation, then, would earn the title of the greatest artistic work of the century's greatest artistic medium. And I firmly believe that Fantasia fits that accolade. Fantasia, released in 1940 as Disney's third animated feature, demonstrates everything an animated film can be. Across its 7 distinct pieces, it proves that animation can be abstract, as in its toccata and fugue in D minor segment, or it can be narrative, as in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It can be mythological, as in the Pastoral Symphony, or scientific, as in The Rite of Spring. It can be comedy, as in The Dance of the Hours, and it can be horror, as in The Night on Bald Mountain. It can be anthropomorphism, as in The Nutcracker Suite, or symbolism, as in Ave Maria. Within Fantasia are contained all films. Married to the great compositions of classical music, it could also aspire to be high art. Fantasia is an incredibly rich, nuanced, and rewarding work, deeply rooted in the traditional fine arts, wedding traditional visual arts and performance arts into the third art of film, a far richer, nuanced, rewarding, and artistic work than many would expect from a Disney movie. Peyton Boswell of the Art Digest wrote in a review of the time that Fantasia, compressed within this new art form, for that is the designation that must be accorded to the latest of animated films, are extracted essences from all the older arts, given realization through the imagination and magic of Disney's genius. Furthermore, Fantasia is a triumph of pantomime, so accomplished that words aren't necessary. An axiom of film is to show, don't tell. Well, Fantasia is all show. No narrator was required to tell us that the Nutcracker Suite transitioned through the seasons, and Mickey Mouse doesn't have to crack a single joke. What could the mighty and fearsome Chernabog possibly say to make him more frightening? What could a David Attenborough add to Rite of Spring that we could not see for ourselves in all of its violence and terror and power? Wisely, music scholar and radio personality Deems Taylor reserved his live-action annotations for between the animated sequences. His sonorous voice, which has since been lost in dubbing over, only gives a few notes in the way of introduction to add to our enjoyment of the piece, like one may find in the program of an evening at the local Philharmonic. Fantasia is a tour de force of visual storytelling, a lasting tribute to the skill of the animator who must infuse drawings with life. Fantasia is artistically advanced, but structurally comprised of short subjects recalling the silly symphony cartoons of Disney's past. A whole is affected not through a coherent plot, but through the virtual experience of a concert performance. The opening piece, Toccata and Fugue in D minor, calls attention to the orchestra and the instruments through some brilliant lighting and editing. It also lulls viewers into a near meditative state. Fantasia's beginning is a liminal space, drawing the viewer out of the regular concerns of the world and beyond the mental space of seeking mere entertainment. That's one of the funny things about Fantasia. It's not really entertaining, at least not in the sense of being merely sensational or comedic or fun per se. It's much more than that. It is a film demanding attention in exchange for deep artistic gratification. My saying that might have appalled Walt, though. On the film's release, he said, "This isn't just a picture for music lovers. People have to like it. They have to be entertained. We're selling entertainment, and that's the thing I'm hoping Fantasia does. Entertain." The net result, however, was something far grander and deeper than that. While Walt himself may not have been consciously motivated by great ideas, that is certainly what we ended up with. Toccata and Fugue in D minor not only opens the film, but also introduces the viewer to Fantasia's distinctive but difficult to trace visual style, and through that, to the first of its major philosophical themes. Though not constrained by a single narrative, Fantasia does express itself through certain key philosophical and even spiritual concepts. The first of those, introduced through Toccata and Fugue in D minor, is Transcendentalism. Ostensibly founded by Russian artist Nicholas Roerich, and including Emil Bistrom, Raymond Johnson, Agnes Pelton, and the Canadian landscape painter Lauren Harris, transcendental art was heavily shaped by the typical concerns of bohemian artist types in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, namely spiritualism, occultism, archaeology, Eastern mysticism, and theosophy. According to its founder, Helena Blavatsky, theosophy had three chief aims. 1. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, color, or creed. 2. To promote the study of Aryan and other scriptures, of the world's religion and sciences, and to vindicate the importance of old Asiatic literature, namely, of the Brahmanical, Buddhist, and Zoroastrian philosophies. And 3. To investigate the hidden mysteries of nature under every aspect possible, and the psychic and spiritual powers latent in man especially. For theosophists and other esotericists, the imagination acted as a crucial faculty in drawing mythic connections that excavated this deeper spiritual self. For transcendental artists, that imagination manifested itself in a genre of painting that reached from stylized landscapes to pure abstraction, based in the worldview, symbolism, and numerology of theosophy. The manifesto of the Transcendental Painters Group, founded by Bistrom and Johnson, was to carry painting beyond the appearance of the physical world, through new concepts of space, color, light, and design, to imaginative worlds that are idealistic and spiritual. To see the resonance between transcendental art and Fantasia, one merely has to compare works of the Transcendentalists to concept art from Fantasia itself. These ideas floated around for the toccata and fugue in D minor sequence could stand alone as accomplished works of transcendental art in and of themselves. The finished film becoming transcendental art given movement by the art of animation. Likewise, it is not difficult to see the echoes of Roerich's or Harris's landscapes in the backgrounds of Sorcerer's Apprentice, Rite of Spring, or Night on Bald Mountain. Roerich's work is more literal in its depiction of places and people, but the simplification of detail in them hints to deeper, underlying spiritual principles. Their simplicity leaves a blank canvas for contemplation. This all points to a similar attitude concerning Fantasia. Whether or not it was intentional on the part of Disney, Fantasia does affect a sense of transcendence. As we move liminally from the real world of the orchestra to sound given shape, color, form, and motion, we are lifted to a transcendental direct access to our subconscious and spiritual minds. Fantasia is, in many ways, a means and an invitation to higher contemplation that circles through nature, time, science, mythology, and divinity. This sort of contemplation does not come without risks, and Fantasia, of course, carries within it a particular story on themes of calling up powerful subconscious forces that could escalate with unforeseen consequences. That would also be its most famous sequence, and its most unlikely: The Sorcerer's Apprentice, starring Mickey Mouse. Though set to the music of French composer Paul Dukas, The Sorcerer's Apprentice betrays its Germanic roots. While clearly echoing Nicholas Roerich's transcendental landscapes, there is also a strong echo of German expressionist style. The lair of the sorcerer Yen Sid could just as easily be in one of Fritz Lang's silent film epics, like Siegfried from 1925. Very appropriate for a short based on a symphonic piece based on a poem by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Itself based on an excerpt from Lucian's Philopseudes, written in 150 CE, Goethe's Der Zauberlehrling was a 14-stanza poem published in 1797. Goethe was a leading writer in German Romanticism, which was a literary, artistic, and musical movement that emphasized emotion, intuition, and imagination against the stifling rationalism of the Enlightenment and its subsequent political and industrial revolutions. Humanity became a means to an end of industrial production, wealth generation, scientific dissection, and imperial expansion, rather than an end unto itself which found its fullness in God. The Enlightenment, for all of its promises and proclamations of reason and liberty, seemed only to lead to moral, economic, social, and spiritual destitution. Romanticism looked mainly to the European Middle Ages as a spiritual, intellectual, nationalistic, and aesthetic model, but was also satisfied with any faraway times, exotic places, and indigenous or folk cultures. Anything that would help counterbalance the deadening weight of the Enlightenment's dark age. Nature held a particular resonance for the Romantics, as the embodiment of wild, untempered, unfettered, and untamed emotional and creative processes, as well as for its own intrinsic spiritual and aesthetic value. The idea of the romantic imagination calling forth the subconscious is replete throughout Fantasia as another of its core philosophical ideas, from the liminal, abstract form and color of Toccata and Fugue in D minor to the ghosts of the dead being raised in Night on Bald Mountain. Richard Wagner was a romantic nationalist composer, and there were plans to produce a Ride of the Valkyries piece for Fantasia, until that idea was scuttled by Wagner's popularity with the Third Reich. Beethoven, perhaps the greatest composer of all time, was also a romantic composer, and Fantasia transmutates his work, the Pastoral Symphony, from an Arcadian vision of pastoral folk paradise to a mythological Elysium. Fantasia also has two major pieces on romantic themes of nature, one beautiful and the other sublime. Like Transcendentalism and Romanticism, the contrasts between the sublime and the beautiful are also a major running theme through Fantasia, arguably even its defining theme, forming the backbone of the entire film and expressed in the contrast between its different pieces and within the pieces themselves. The best-known study on the subject of the sublime and the beautiful is by the English philosopher Edmund Burke, in his foundational aesthetic essay on the sublime and the beautiful. In it, he defines the sublime as the passion caused by the great and the sublime in nature, when those causes operate most powerfully, is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended, with some degree of horror. In this case, the mind is so entirely filled with its object that it cannot entertain any other, nor by consequence reason on that object which employs it. Hence arises the great power of the sublime, that far from being produced by them, it anticipates our reasonings, and hurries us on by an irresistible force. Astonishment, as I have said, is the effect of the sublime in its highest degree. The inferior effects are admiration, reverence, and respect. Burke goes on to say that the sublime is affected by such attributes as vastness, infinity, overwhelming and overarching power, privation, obscurity, darkness, magnitude, suddenness or shock, brash noise, and terror, each of which earns its own chapter in that captivating essay. Beauty, on the other hand, Burke defines as possessing the qualities of even proportion, delicacy, smoothness, mild coloration, softness and sound, grace, and elegance. Then, to compare them, Burke writes, "For sublime objects are vast in their dimensions, beautiful ones comparatively small. Beauty should be smooth and polished, the great rugged and negligent. Beauty should shun the right line, yet deviate from it insensibly. The great, in many cases, loves the right line, and when it deviates, it often makes a strong deviation. Beauty should not be obscure. The great ought to be dark and gloomy. Beauty should be light and delicate. The great ought to be solid and even massive. They are indeed ideas of a very different nature, one being founded on pain, the other on pleasure. Fantasia's two great pieces on nature exemplify this contrast. The first is the Nutcracker Suite, a delicate, beautiful ballet of nature. It certainly has its cartoony caricatures, as caricatured as Tchaikovsky's music is itself. But what is most remarkable is the delicacy of the animation. The evanescent, semi-transparent delicacy of the fairies, dew, leaves, ice, and autumn seeds floating on the air. The skill required to do this on image after image, cell after cell, is unfathomable. Though lacking the Tchaikovsky ballet's original narrative of a human condemned by a curse to live as a nutcracker, at war with the Mouse King until the curse is broken by a little girl on Christmas, Fantasia's Nutcracker Suite nevertheless retains the character of a ballet. Fairies of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, of dew and frost and snow, glide along leaves and skate across water to tones of the Dance of the Sugar-Plum Fairy and Waltz of the Flowers, while various fish and flowers dance the ballet's ethnic dances. Unlike the satirical Dance of the Hours, which gives a wink and a nudge to the pretensions of high art and theatre, this is a straightforward ballet that effectively captures the grace of that art form. That grace and beauty in turn points to the grace and beauty of nature itself. Furthermore, the drawn animation of Fantasia highlights that nature is itself alive and animated. Flowers don't dance in real life, sure, but they are alive. The animals, the plants, even the cycles of nature are animated, living things. Those living things come from somewhere, which brings us to the sublime aspect of nature, to contrast with the Nutcracker Suite's picture of delicate beauty in nature's smallest dimensions. Through Rite of Spring, and with the advisement of paleontologist Barnum Brown and astronomer Edwin Hubble, Disney portrays billions of years of evolution as a grand struggle, titanic, vicious and brutal, punctuated with cosmic and geologic cataclysm. Much of the segment is a study in effects techniques more than traditional animation. The field of stars, molten earth, billowing volcanoes, bubbling mud pits, and other artifacts of the Hadean Eon were rendered by innovative practical effects refined by the artist's palette. Dinosaur movies are a demanding, effects-intensive genre that beg for cinematic innovation. After the Hadean, Disney's animators depict a primitive, swampy world in deep, earthy tones. We've grown more accustomed since then to see colorful dinosaurs, very much like modern animals, in bright worlds much like our own. In Fantasia, and its three-dimensional form along the Disneyland Railroad, we see dull, dim, archaic reptiles in an alien, reptilian, antediluvian world where everyone eats everyone else in a ceaseless and merciless evolutionary battle. No wonder, then, that New York Herald Tribune reviewer Dorothy Thompson described Fantasia as brutal and brutalizing, an assault, a performance of satanic defilement, so perverse an expression, an assault on the civilized world, and an expression of Walt Disney's sadistic, gloomy, fatalistic, pantheistic philosophy to record the fall of man and to record it with sadistic relish. A film in which nature is titanic, man a moving lichen on the stone of time. Thompson, to her shame, was even a pioneer in the trope of calling everyone Nazis. All I could think to say of the experience as I staggered out was that it was Nazi, she wrote. The word did not arise out of an obsession. Nazism is the abuse of power, the perverted betrayal of the best instincts, the genius of a race turned into black magical destruction, and so is the Fantasia. Now, to his credit, Carl Lindstrom of the Hartford Times decried the Nazi cudgel as the most conscienceless thing that has occurred to music in many a year, adding, it should be widely and deeply resented. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Other critics also rose to Disney's defense, decrying Thompson's column as sheer, unadulterated hysteria and Philistinism pure and simple. But despite her histrionic verbiage and flagrant abuse of the Nazi cudgel, Thompson wasn't entirely wrong. Rite of Spring is brutal and brutalizing, intentionally demonstrating the sublime aspect of nature and overpowering geologic time. The contrasts of the sublime and the beautiful are also prevalent in the Pastoral Symphony's paradisial vision of Mount Olympus, with its occasional disruption by Zeus lurking about on a storm cloud. It may also have been the most controversial piece in the film. There was the incident of a Topsy-like Negro centaur handmaiden who has since been excised by editing and revised animation. But what remains is still a Disneyfied impression of Greek mythology, set to the music of perhaps the greatest composer of all time. Many critics have perceived it as too cloying and childish, both with mythology and Beethoven's classic romantic music. Dorothy Thompson, in her Shotgun Review, said that it alone should have been sufficient to raise an army if there is enough blood left in culture to defend itself, adding it could have been used to torture Beethoven if he had lived to see the inside of a Nazi concentration camp, and was, with the film as a whole, a caricature of the decline of the West. For those who like their Bacchus to be the spry embodiment of lustful indulgence, rather than the squat embodiment of jovial excess, this sequence might be disappointing. To those offended by the debasement of Beethoven, well, sorry, I guess. For me, the sequence of night falling, and Artemis lighting the sky with her lunar bow, is beyond compare in the canon of animation. Quite literally my favorite single scene in any film. There is genuine beauty amidst the cartoon Pegasi, Cupids, and Centaurs acting out the domestic bliss of family life, childhood, courtship, and community festivals. After the antediluvian hell of Rite of Spring, the Pastoral Symphony gives us a pastel vision of heavenly paradise, scientific fact contrasted with mythological utopias. Dance of the Hours, despite being a winking and nudging satire of ballet, and suffering from the crude humor of fat animals dancing is funny because they're fat, it still has aspects of that contrast between the sublime and the beautiful, when alligators come out to skulk and harass the ballerinas. No piece, however, so thoroughly embodies the sublime and the beautiful than Fantasia's final piece, Night on Bald Mountain, and Ave Maria. Walt Disney called the central figure of Night on Bald Mountain Satan himself, though perhaps that was a little heavy for what was nevertheless a Disney film, in all that may imply. His actual name is Chernabog, the Slavic black god, and one of my favorite Disney character designs, in my favorite piece of Disney animation, in my favorite Disney film, which might be a little awkward if we took Walt's word for it that this was the devil. One of my fondest memories of Halloween was the annual ritual of watching Hans Conried as the Magic Mirror, hosting an anthology episode of Disney villains, topped off with Chernabog's leering visage chilling us to the bones before sending us out to scare up candy. Nevertheless, it would be a strange fascination to hold if there was not a deeper interpretation to draw from it. While Chernabog may have been utilized to satanic effect in Night on Bald Mountain, the actual history of Chernabog is far more complex. The first recorded mentions of Chernabog come from 12th century accounts of Slavic culture, but they contain little reliable information on exactly what he was believed to be, mainly because they were written by Christian missionaries to then pagan peoples. From what can be reconstructed by scholars, it seems likely that Chernabog was a god connected with the dispensing of fortune, both good and bad. This possibly being the case, and I admit that it is speculative, the Night on Bald Mountain and Ave Maria sequence of Fantasia may be giving us an accidental recapitulation of actual history. Chernabog, not necessarily a god of evil or good, but certainly connected to the underworld and the dead, is supplanted by Christianity, which proceeds to cast him as the devil. Night on Bald Mountain was composed by Modest Mussorgsky and inspired by Nikolai Golga's 1830 book St. John's Eve. It is a chilling tale of witches, greed, classism, and demonic possession. The date of St. John's Eve, June 24th, is significant, as it marks Midsummer Eve, the summer solstice, and the Slavic pagan holy day of Ivana Kupala. With the arrival of Christianity, the date was claimed for St. John the Baptist, and the rituals reinterpreted. However, folk memory retained the ancient pagan practices and began to see St. John's Eve as a night of devilry and witchcraft. It was Mussorgsky who identified Chernabog as the demon presiding over the devilry on St. John's Eve, and it was Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov who finished the piece after Mussorgsky's death in 1881. Rimsky-Korsakov's program notes describe the piece thusly: subterranean sounds of unearthly voices, appearance of the spirits of darkness, followed by that of Chernabog, glorification of Chernabog and celebration of the Black Mass, witches' Sabbath. At the height of the orgy, the bell of the little village church is heard from afar. The spirits of darkness are dispersed. Daybreak. Rather than an inventive reinterpretation in the vein of the Pastoral Symphony or a Rite of Spring, Night on Bald Mountain is a fairly straightforward, programmatic animating of the symphony's actual story. Paired with Ave Maria, the sequence goes beyond good and evil, as it were, to exemplify the difference between the sublime and the beautiful. On the one side is the sublime of Night on Bald Mountain. Everything grand, overpowering, horrifying, massive, ancient, dark, foreboding, the extremes of emotion, the ragged mountain, the crypts of the fallen warriors of battles long forgotten, cemeteries and ruin, of cacophonous bacchanalia. On the other is the beauty of Ave Maria, everything delicate, sacred, soft, sensible, comforting, graceful, light, serene, of holy pilgrims, organic forms, and the genteel melodies of Schubert's great hymn set to a beaming dawn. Furthermore, as I have said, Fantasia could be interpreted in its entirety as a meditation on these drives. From the beauty of fairies, magic, cherubs, and silly animals dancing ballet, to the sublime of geologic cataclysms, prehistoric combat, wrathful deities, alligators skulking under cover of darkness, and a crashing symphony of oceans and comets conducted by Mickey Mouse. The battle between good and evil, between Chernobog's furious, destructive, sensual orgy of fire and the victorious monk's candlelit pilgrimage through a cathedral-like forest, is only the most superficial layer of interpretation. This isn't merely a moralizing metaphor for evil's lively seductions and good's pious serenity. It is a discourse on aesthetic philosophy and musical theory. After the awesome power and goth spookiness of Night on Bald Mountain, it is easy to lose track of Ave Maria as anything more than an addendum to close the piece. But it is essential as a counterpoint to the prior underworld bacchanal and its closure to the film as a whole. With Ave Maria, we round out and integrate everything that we have seen, not only in this sequence, but through the entire film. From the liminal and transcendent space of the toccata and fugue in D minor, drawing us to higher contemplation and higher consciousness, through the delicate ballet of nature and its titanic geological forces of creation and destruction, through the roiling, romantic subconscious brought forth with uncontrollable consequences, and Elysian visions of eternal paradise. We now close with a calming pilgrimage through a cathedral-like forest, recalling the roots of the architectural Gothic in natural form, the harmony of nature and civilization, the integration of earth and the divine, of the natural and the spiritual, of the abstract and the representational, of the conscious and the subconscious, leading to and closing with the soaring choir and the breaking dawn. Pretty heady stuff, which is why I can understand that audiences weren't exactly looking for that kind of thing at that moment in history. While Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a milestone that broke all box office expectations, subsequent films suffered from diminishing returns. The Fantasound surround sound system that Disney developed to achieve concert reel sound quality was expensive to install. The movie was expensive to make, and Disney's most unusual and experimental to date. And the European markets had been shut off by World War II. Fantasia's returns were so dire that the film didn't start to recoup its production costs until its re-release in 1969, when it became a psychedelic cult classic. The negative feedback and even more negative returns soured Walt to animation in the long term. He had built success upon success, from Steamboat Willie to Silly Symphonies to Snow White. But Fantasia marked his first major failure. And it wasn't just a missed shot either. Walt predicted that Fantasia merely makes our other pictures look immature, and suggests for the first time what the future of the medium may well turn out to be. But it wasn't to be. Fantasia was an art house film attempted by a major Hollywood studio with a major Hollywood budget. The next film by Disney to turn a profit was Dumbo, a fun, charming little picture that Walt generally had little to do with. The whole episode, also coinciding with the 1941 animator strike, was a blow to his confidence, sense of experimentation, and feelings of being vitally tapped into American culture. The receipts were in, and there was nothing new, nothing higher he could do with animation. Walt would still have his nose in everything the animation studio did, but after Fantasia, his own interest turned primarily towards live action, documentaries, television, and theme parks. Fantasia, and its failure, marked a major turning point for Walt. Still, its imagery has resonated through the Disney company. Sorcerer Mickey is the next most iconic form of their corporate mascot, after his basic yellow shoes and red shorts. Chernabog, Ben Alligator, Hyacinth Hippo, Madame Upanova, and Hop Lo regularly find themselves being merchandised. Disney doesn't treat the film's legacy as well as they should. It has lacked a home video release in any of Disney's premium formats, be it Platinum DVD, Diamond Blu-ray, or Signature Digital, and was last given proper treatment in a 3-disc Fantasia anthology box set in the year 2000, saddled with its hollow, disingenuous corporate committee sequel. Despite this mistreatment, its characters and images are too important to avoid. Appreciating Fantasia takes a huge investment of time, attention, and contemplation, but the results are well worth it.